I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. I hope that you're staying warm on this frigid night. We're going to hear the latest from Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino on that approaching ice storm. But first, let's take a look at an exciting possibility for the future of building. A lot of it taking place at Oregon State University. Mass timber is what it's called, and it's our big story tonight. When you think about climate change and greenhouse gases, you probably think about tailpipes and smokestacks billowing carbon dioxide into the air. But there's another big cause. The construction materials, specifically concrete and steel, those account for a significant portion of our emissions. One way to change that, use more wood instead. Tonight we're going to Corvallis, where they're trying to find new ways to replace concrete with timber, mass timber. They're very successful at that. Environmental reporter Cale Williams takes us inside an Oregon State facility where the engineers are building and testing the future of construction.
On the eastern edge of the Oregon State campus, in a nondescript building next to a dairy barn, the future of eco-friendly construction is taking shape.
This will be a foundation beam.
That's Mark Gehrig,
Coming south this way.
a lab technician at the Emmerson Advanced Wood Products Lab at OSU.
This beam will be cut to a very specific length.
The lab specializes in the design, manufacture, and structural testing of mass timber. Now, if you've never heard of mass timber, in its simplest form, it's basically just a lot of small pieces of wood glued together. But there are a bunch of different kinds.
So this is a glue lam. It's made with like 2x6s that are finger jointed on the ends and then glued at a factory to make a structural beam. And they custom make these according to your structural needs.
Aside from glue lams, there's LVL, or laminated veneer lumber. There's also CLT, or cross-laminated timber, which is usually made up of 2x6s. And there's MPP, or mass plywood panels.
Mass ply is plywood glued in layers. Instead of using 2x6s, they start with structural plywood and glue it in 1 inch increments to make a structural panel, and that's what our building is made out of here.
I mean, isn't plywood just essentially layers of wood glued together already?
It is indeed. It's just very large. It's macro plywood.
To create and test all those different kinds of mass timber, Gehrig oversees a lot of impressive machinery. There's a CNC machine, which can cut and drill and shape and carve pieces of timber into just about any shape.
There we are. You can see the beam is modeled to length, and then the whole pattern that we're machining into it is there.
There's a giant planer,
We mainly use this to plane 2x6s.
used to prep the wood before the pieces are glued together.
One of the important factors to making CLT is getting like fresh surfaces with the same moisture content.
And there's a massive press
This is called a cold press.
for gluing whole panels.
We can make glue lam with it. We can make full CLT panels with it. That's that machine.
Cool.
There's also a robotic arm.
This is your most futuristic looking machine.
It absolutely is. This is the one where everybody oohs and ahs.
Like you might see on an industrial assembly line.
Can you make it move around for us?
I can make it move around for you.
And that's only half the lab.
So this is the structural testing bay of our Emmerson Advanced Wood Products Lab. And so here we look at the performance of wood products that are going to go into buildings. Well, yeah. And,
That's Ian McDonald, director of the facility.
And from here on over, we have this 4.5 foot thick concrete slab with all these reinforced anchor points in them. And then we've got a similar pattern on the wall there, which is also about 4 feet thick.
Engineers can bolt their creations to the floor or wall so that they can simulate real-world stresses like a roof loaded with snow, a windstorm, or an earthquake.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is these are the hydraulic actuators that are used to exert the forces to simulate either earthquake motions or just gravity motions.
The lab is big enough that they recently built a full 3-story structure. Then they covered it in sensors and started pushing on it using the actuators, which can produce up to 600,000 pounds of pressure. The results tell the engineers whether the test structures can stand up to the forces they would encounter out in the real world.
Sometimes it's a whole building that we've erected in here. We have the space to do that in here. Sometimes it's just an element, like a floor panel or a wall or a corner section.
Now, mass timber has been around for a while, but it's gotten new life recently as builders and engineers have looked for greener alternatives to traditional building materials like steel and concrete. And you might not know a mass timber building just from looking at it. There are several around Portland that look a lot like their concrete and steel counterparts. But making concrete and steel produces a ton of carbon dioxide. And after water, concrete is the most consumed material on the planet. As the human population grows,
There's, I think, the equivalent of a city the size of New York going up every month in the world. That's the level of urbanization we're facing.
and the effects of climate change come into sharper focus, mass timber offers some stark advantages.
Wood is a renewable material, right? So solar energy is how trees grow. There's obviously an energy cost when you take the fiber out of the forest and you process it into lumber or veneer, or then eventually into mass timber or something like that. But when you compare it to the energy required to produce steel or the energy required to produce cement and concrete, it's greatly lower.
It is still an emerging technology, though, and McDonald says it still faces some hurdles.
Architects and engineers are not used to working with these materials necessarily as much as they're used to working with concrete and steel. So there's an education process there. Developers need to know that they can build these for a similar cost to concrete and steel buildings. We're seeing that happens now.
But with that being said, McDonald is confident our region is poised to be on the leading edge.
As early adopters of this technology in the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon are really poised to kind of achieve a global leadership position, and we're actually working on plans to get to that point. Within 10 years, we have aspirations to be the kind of world competitive region for mass timber manufacturing and design and construction.
Cale's with me now. What a super interesting story. And I know that you're a woodworker. That must have been fascinating for you.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get carried away. I'm very much of a hobby woodworker. I make cutting boards and little tables, but I have much smaller versions of a lot of those tools at my house. So to see them on that grand of a scale, the gee whiz factor was out of control.
Just giant land, right?
Oh man, I was wandering around like a little kid. I gotta say.
Good for you. All right, and one part of my brain is saying, well, this mass timber or mass lumber is going to take mass timber. Doesn't that also impact carbon footprints?
It's true. The trees are a big carbon sink, but you have to put it in comparison to what it takes to manufacture concrete and steel. Now, it takes a lot of heat to make concrete. You got to get those things really hot, which takes fossil fuels to do. And then the process of making concrete also releases carbon dioxide of its own.
Okay. And then finally, how big can these things be built?
Well, U.S. codes currently allow them to be up to 18 stories. And McDonald, the director, he told me that the sweet spot is really between 6 stories and 12 stories. You go any lower than that, and it's hard to be competitive with traditional framing. You get higher than that, you get into some pretty tricky engineering problems.
Wow, fascinating stuff. Thank you, Cale Williams. Go Beavs, they're always doing something fascinating. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts on mass timber. Do you have any questions about it? How about the pros and cons that come to mind for you? Let us know, will you? Send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Now let's get to our weather coverage. And we only bring in the big gun on the story when things are really looking terrible out there. Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino joins us now. Matt, the National Weather Service has us under an ice storm warning. That does not sound good.
It is not good. And the interesting thing about this, well, there's a couple things, but the expiration time for the ice storm warning in the Portland area, it's not until 4 a.m. on Wednesday morning, okay? But farther down the valley, it expires much earlier. This one expires at 10 p.m. on Tuesday night. So that's a good 6-hour difference. You may wonder, why does it expire so much earlier here than it does in the Portland area? Well, they're going to get warmer and get above freezing sooner than we will. And that, of course, plays into the whole freezing rain forecast thing. And, of course, what we had on Saturday was sleet. So
I was going to ask about that. The difference, why sleet then and freezing rain now?
Yeah, exactly. And the reason is the depth of the cold air and the depth of the warm air, too. So let me explain, because it gets a little complicated, but it's interesting. All of our precipitation in the northern hemisphere, basically, is certainly in the mid-latitudes, begins as snow, even in the summer. And then it melts and it turns into rain. And, of course, once you get below the melting layer in a normal atmosphere, it's rain all the way down because it gets warmer as you get lower. But in the wintertime like this, we get inversions, which means the atmosphere gets a little upside down, meaning that it's colder down low, and then there can be a layer of warm air above that. So when we get a freezing rain situation, cold, snow, melts into rain in this warm layer, but then right at the surface, there's this shallow layer of below freezing air. That's where we are right now. That's where we're going to be for the next couple of days. So the rain, as it falls into that sub-freezing air, because that layer is so shallow, it doesn't have time to refreeze into sleet or ice pellets. So it hits the ground as a liquid, but of course everything's below freezing, so it freezes, and that's when you get that glaze ice, that layer of ice on things, Pat, that is just so terrible and so nasty and so difficult to deal with. Now, on Saturday, it was a sleet situation, and notice the difference here. With freezing rain, thick layer of warm air, thin layer of cold air at the surface. With sleet, thin layer of warm air, thick layer of cold air at the surface. So you get partial melting in that warm layer, partial melting, not complete, and then it falls back into sub-freezing air. So those wet, messy, partially melted snowflakes freeze into ice pellets or what we call sleet. So that's the difference there. And of course, if the atmosphere is cold all the way to the surface, then you just get snow. Now, let me put some numbers to this for you because I found this super interesting. This is back on Saturday. Parkdale, 1,700 feet, pretty low elevation, was 2, deep into that Arctic air. But you go up to the base of Mount Hood Meadows at 5,400 feet, still cold, but warmer. And then you go higher. This was Saturday, real numbers here. Top of the Cascade Chair at 7,300 feet, it was 30 degrees. And yesterday, I was at Meadows, and I left the parking lot, and it was 30 degrees, and I got down to Parkdale, and it was 7. So you can get these dramatic shifts with these Arctic inversions, right? So some more real numbers and real data for you. This is a sounding or a temperature profile of the atmosphere, which was produced by the weather balloon that was released at Salem during the day on Saturday. When you see this black line go in that direction, that means it's getting warmer as you go up. That's a really steep temperature inversion. So there was this little layer here that I highlighted in red that was actually above the 0 degree or the 32 degree isotherm, meaning above freezing. How deep was it? Well, it was a really shallow layer there of 32 degree air or warmer, and it was the perfect combination to get sleet because that layer, and I measured it, it was only 1,834 feet thick, so about 1,800 feet thick, and it went from 32 to 38 degrees. Now, to get sleet, textbook-wise, you want a layer that's no more than 2,000 feet thick, and you want it to be between 34 and 38 degrees. Nailed it. We just nailed it. That was real data in our atmosphere on Saturday. That's why we got sleet. This time around, the cold layer at the surface is much thinner, so we get freezing rain anywhere from a quarter to a half an inch in the Portland area. And again, more north and east towards the gorge, less south and west towards Eugene because they'll warm up sooner. Pat?
All right. Thank you, Matt. Always fascinating. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Coming up next on The Story, the county has a dozen warming shelters that are open tonight, but the winter storm over the weekend also showcased another example of miscommunication or maybe dysfunction between the city of Portland and Multnomah County. Details and a response from the director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services when The Story returns. The effects of this winter storm have really touched all parts of our community, from the roads to city infrastructure, the economy, but most importantly, of course, the people. At this point, we know that 4 people are dead because of the storm. 2 were caused by falling trees. The other 2 were likely due to hypothermia, which means basically they froze to death. We all know about these. All that we do know about the 2 cases is that one man was found dead in inner southeast Portland on Friday. The other man was found dead in North Portland on Saturday. Both tragedies bring up a topic that we often cover on the story. That's the response to homelessness between the city of Portland and Multnomah County. It often seems to us as if the 2 are kind of in a tug of war with each other. For example, on Friday morning, Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson declared a countywide state of emergency ahead of the storm. And in that press release, the county showed off all the supplies that the Joint Office of Homeless Services and nonprofits had been giving out. Things like hoodies, sweatpants, warm hats, gloves, socks, and also over 1,500 tarps, nearly 400 tents, and nearly 400 sleeping bags, along with 1,500 wool blankets. All of those numbers are far higher today, by the way, but let's just work with those numbers for a moment. At the very same time that the county was handing out all those supplies, the city was coming and sweeping the homeless camps, the city of Portland, and they kept it up until noon on Friday. That means it's quite possible that at least some of those supplies that the county handed out days or even hours prior were then being picked up by the city and subsequently thrown out. Tax dollars in, tax dollars, well, trashed. City sweeps are paused for the time being, by the way, because of the weather. Today, we got a rare opportunity to take our questions about this issue right to the top of the agency in charge of handing out those supplies in the first place, the director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. We wanted to know why hand them out in the first place if they're just going to be picked up by the city soon after. Can't there be some better coordination?
What we're picking up after a camp sweep, nothing is taken from anybody. The first part of a sweep is connecting people to services. We work very hard days ahead to connect people to services. We make multiple outreach attempts. Once they've been connected to services and they are moved from the site, we do pick up any trash that's left behind, but we're not taking supplies from people.
You're not picking up the tents?
We're picking up trash that's left behind after people have been moved out of a site.
All right, but if we have video that shows tents being picked up and...
I have no doubt that tents are part of the trash that's left behind when people move into services or move to a different site.
Okay, so does it make when taxpayers see all this, when one agency is handing out supplies and the other agency is taking the supplies back?
It's a good question. That tent may have kept somebody alive for a night, a couple nights, a week, and when they're ready to move into services or move to a different site and they no longer need that tent may become trash. But if it's kept somebody alive for a single night, I'd say the cost of the tent is worth it.
That was our photographer, Mike Galamanis, asking those questions, by the way, not answering them. Now, before we move on, many of you know that our reporter Blair Best does an outstanding job covering the homeless crisis in our community, getting the stories straight from the homeless folks themselves. And when we told her about Dan Field saying that they do not take anything from people during those sweeps, she told us that's not what she hears from the people on the streets. A camp is posted for removal at least 3 days ahead of time, and that's when folks are supposed to start gathering their stuff. But Blair tells us that rarely happens. So when crews do arrive 3 days later to remove the camp, it's often a last-minute scramble for folks to grab anything they can before crews pick up the rest, including tents, and either put it in storage for 30 days or sometimes just throw it out if they think it's trash. Today, when we asked Mr. Field what he would say to folks who do not think that giving out those supplies is the best use of tax dollars, well, here's how he responded.
The supplies that the Joint Office and Multnomah County and City of Portland and nonprofits hand out are designed to keep people safe and healthy and alive. And we will never regret that, and we will never back down from that decision to hand out life-saving supplies, particularly during weather events like this.
So there you have it. Another data point mentioned today in regards to shelter is that last night the county sheltered the most people it ever has in a single night, over 1,100 people, which is great. I'm glad they got inside. But that did get our team thinking. And of course, we're no experts, but there's been a push lately to centralize the database with specific details on homeless folks in our community. It would include things like name, what their needs are, what can be done to help get them off the street. So what better time to gather some of that information than during an event like this? When you are over 1,000 people strong, those people all coming to you for shelter. Seems logical, right? Well, apparently far easier said than done because it's not really happening.
Is the county using this opportunity to connect people with services that they might not otherwise be connected with?
Wherever possible, but I also want to caution that, especially given that we've got so many volunteers and so many folks here whose day job is not involved in that. Our goals with these particular shelters is not to do case management at this moment. That's really kind of beyond our abilities in this environment, which is really just about getting one life-saving resource out. Anything we can do in those moments, it does happen for sure, but that's not our goal at this moment. These goals are really just, life-saving intervention in this moment so that we can get folks, to tomorrow when we're gonna pick that up.
Okay, so those are the facts. Now, here's my opinion on this. Obviously, the number one goal should be to get people inside so they can survive. This really is life-threatening weather out there and nothing to play around with. But this also feels like an incredible opportunity to help connect all kinds of people with services, to help get them off the street. Instead of having to go corner to corner looking for camps, the people are literally coming to you. For agencies set up to help homeless folks, this should be your biggest moment of the year. It should be all hands on deck. Think about it. These frigid nights provide the perfect setting at all the open shelters to get detailed information from hundreds of people streaming in now off the streets. It could even be as simple as having a single volunteer sign people into the shelter, take down their name, an area where they usually camp, and the things that each individual thinks they might need to get off the street once and for all. And after the storms have passed, then you can follow up. You have this great database with potentially hundreds of names, individual situations, even locations where you can go find those people again to get them the help that they need. Yes, we need to give people a warm and safe place tonight and tomorrow night and beyond that if it's needed. But if that's all that we're doing during events like this, in my opinion, it's a missed opportunity. And some of you will say, well, the weather makes it unsafe for workers to get to these shelters to make all that work happen. I agree, the roads are dicey out there, but I don't believe it's impossible to get workers there. Surely someone has a four-wheel drive that could offer help. If we really want to make progress in this homeless situation, we really need to take advantage of opportunities like this one. And asking the information I've suggested when people check into your warming shelter seems like an obvious first step. That's my opinion anyway. What do you think? You don't have to agree with me. That's fine, but you should communicate. Email your thoughts our way, will ya? Let's keep the dialogue going. Send it to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. The phone number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you. Well, today's the day we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in honor of what would have been his 95th birthday. So for our Digging for Old segment tonight, we wanted to check the Oregon Historical Society's online collection to try and highlight a black trailblazer in our area that you probably have not heard about. And we did find one, but we were unable to track down any photos of her specifically. Her name was Inez Irene Pierce Duke Mayberry, and you should know about her. She was the first black woman to be licensed as a beautician in the state of Oregon. This is her license from back in 1927. She was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1897 and moved to Portland in 1917. She graduated from Sanitary Beauty College in 1926, got her license from the state the following year, and owned and operated a beauty shop for nearly 50 years. She started working out of her home in North Vancouver Avenue and then at the We 3 Salon of Beauty along Northeast Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard using this very chair in the 50s and 60s. She died at the age of 99 back in 1997 and is survived by 3 sons, 11 grandchildren, and 11 more great-grandchildren. What a legacy she left behind. Congratulations. That's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.